Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. September 15, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Todd Gordon leaves ECW. WWF Ground Zero review, lots of MMA shoot news with forgotten submission wrestling pay-per-view featuring big names. USWA in shambles. WCW does huge business. And much more, by Observer staff. For numerous reasons, the biggest one being that this is the pro wrestling industry, it was almost a given that ECW founder Todd Gordon and the prime decision maker, Paul Heyman, would eventually split. Like most business separations of the type, it probably wouldn't be pleasant. Still, the circumstances surrounding the split wound up being strange, even by pro wrestling standards, complete with alleged backstabbing, intrigue, secrets, leaks and all the elements of a good wrestling angle. The split officially and somewhat quietly as far as the company went appeared to take place over the weekend, although many insiders knew it was coming for more than 1 week and reportedly Heyman had informed the WWF of the goings-on and probable end result at least 2 weeks earlier. It was no secret to anyone at the ECW shows this weekend that Gordon was out, allegedly for failing in an attempt to get numerous ECW wrestlers to join him in jumping to WCW to do a new version of the NWO angle using the ECW wrestlers as the outsiders. Such a scenario may very well have been discussed. There is little doubt that two things did occur. One, that Gordon and WCW booker Terry Taylor had a conversation or more regarding the availability of ECW talent as WCW is looking to expand its talent roster in 1998 because of its more ambitious schedule, and that Taylor contacted at least one, Shane Douglas, if not more ECW wrestlers after the conversation with Gordon. Douglas claimed to have been offered $300,000 per year to sign, which begs the logical question that if that was true, what kept him from signing, although Douglas has in part blamed his failed WWF stint on heat from Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Supposedly Scott Levy, Raven, contacted Tommy Dreamer, who was given an indication he could get a $200,000 per year contract should he want it, although there have been denials of that story as well, with people close to Levy claiming that Heyman and Kevin Sullivan were spreading the story about Levy contacting ECW wrestlers. The other is that a few ECW wrestlers over the past 2 weeks told Heyman that Gordon approached them regarding a similar plan and storyline. As it turned out, none of them accepted the deal at this point, although Bill Alfonso appears to have been a party to the situation and his ECW tenure looked bleak as he was buried at house shows over the weekend. Perry Saturn's leaving last week was a different set of circumstances unrelated to the Gordon-Heyman split. It is difficult to buy such a scenario as the story is out and may have been discussed actually being able to take place in WCW. What Gordon and Taylor were supposedly putting together begs the question as to whether Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall would allow a group of wrestlers, none with any name value to mainstream fans, do what is basically their own angle within the same promotion at a time when their angle is still, based on TV ratings and house show attendance, in its ascension rather than its decline. And even if it was on the decline, we've seen how they guard their positions and their angle. A source within WCW claimed that Gordon approached Taylor with the idea of being a manager of 2 or 3 ECW wrestlers that he would bring along, but that they nixed the idea because they didn't think Gordon would make a good manager. There are other pieces of the puzzle that are somewhat curious and don't appear to add up. Gordon's being surprisingly quiet in the wake of his departure from the company that he had founded, particularly since he wasn't a behind-the-scenes anonymous type money man, although Heyman had been controlling the company finances for some time now and Gordon was more a figurehead television personality with some behind-the-scenes duties, but instead seemed to relish in the kissing up from the hangers-on, outside favorable publicity given to himself as the so-called promoter of a cult favorite wrestling company, the Todd is God chants from the fans and his own on-air role as commissioner and his frequent bumps. The other is that given the opportunity to go to a major league company that is far more stable when it comes to long-term, particularly after several parties expressed dissatisfaction with pay-per-view payoffs, to earn more money and at the same time work a less dangerous style, that at least a few of the wrestlers wouldn't have taken offers if they were serious. From a public standpoint, Heyman has tried to portray the situation as simply a business split and wouldn't say anything negative publicly about Gordon, although his comments behind the scenes to wrestlers, friends, ECW personnel and others close to the company haven't been nearly as kind. When Gordon was contacted for comments, he said he didn't want to discuss the situation but appeared from those who spoke with him to be curiously pleased that he was coming off as a major heel to the ECW fans, as almost as if this was an elaborate wrestling angle. His only comments were that it was a personal situation between himself and Heyman and that he didn't want to talk about it. Gordon is rumored to be divorcing himself not only from ECW, but from the wrestling business. When the story became somewhat public knowledge toward the latter stages of this past week, Gordon canceled going to the 2 ECW shows in Waltham, Massachusetts and Revere, Massachusetts, while the word spread among the boys. Earlier in the week, on several wrestling hotlines, including ECW's own, which was later quickly changed, a story about a mole within ECW looking to steal its wrestlers and bring them to WCW had surfaced, spread to at least some degree by Heyman and/or others in his inner circle. It was not a secret to anyone close to the situation that the identity of the so-called mole was going to be Gordon. Heyman had the ECW ticket office, which part of Gordon's longtime family business, Carver W. Reed Jewelry Store in Philadelphia, cleaned out on September 5th after word began surfacing about the story and with Gordon's name connected, in lieu of setting up a new business office in New York. To show that this was hardly a smooth and well-planned-out transition, the new business office is something in the talking stages rather than one already set up. Heyman toward the end of the week was attempting to get his ducks in a row, so to speak, on other ECW business that Gordon was involved with, most notably the booking of the ECW arena, which Gordon has handled and had the relationship with the building owners. Besides Heyman, it appears the most powerful forces in ECW are now all the inner circle of wrestlers sometimes known as the New York clique: Tommy Dreamer, Taz, Chris Condito and Bubba Ray Dudley, although Douglas and Sabu also have input. Gordon founded ECW as Eastern Championship Wrestling in 1992 after Joel Goodhart's Tri-State Wrestling Alliance, the forerunner of ECW, which Gordon was a business partner in, folded. The company was drawing small houses, playing in area nightclubs and schools, using mostly local wrestlers and a few ex-WWF and WCW mid-level stars before Gordon brought in Eddie Gilbert as booker and started producing a local television show. Dating back to Goodhart, who was a big fan of Memphis wrestling and put together the kind of shows that he as a fan wanted to see, the company was built largely around the brawling with objects and blood, angles and turns in nearly every match, and what later became known worldwide as either FMW or now ECW style, although in both cases, since Atsushi Onita learned the style in the early 80s when he wrestled in Memphis, it really dates back to old-time Southern-style booking. ECW was spilling a lot of blood in the ring, but it was bleeding to death money-wise and on the verge of folding when Heyman, who Gilbert himself actually brought into the company, maneuvered himself into the booking position in 1993. Building around Terry Funk, Shane Douglas and giving Sabu his first significant exposure in the United States, by early the next year began expanding on the company's very small cult base of fans, and through his amazing talents in media relations, wrestler characterizations and public manipulation, and changing the company name to a more hip and catchy Extreme Championship Wrestling, survived and grew largely through its merchandising and videotape sales. During a period where both WWF and WCW were at times limited in vision when it came to the present and the future, he was able to introduce new great workers, most of whom were small, that had already been established in either Mexico or Japan to the U.S. audience, and is, along with many others, responsible for the breakdown in the size barrier and the accompanying increase in overall work rate industry-wide. In addition, many of Heyman's booking patterns, from the wildness to more of a product that appeals primarily to males in their late teens and early 20s, have been copied by WCW and WWF and have helped the resurgence of interest in both groups over the past year and a half. ECW presented some of the best wrestling matches in the world in 1995 and early 1996 with the likes of Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Rey Mysterio Jr., Juventud Guerrera and Psicosis, among others, all of whom wound up as the backbone in WCW's in-ring product, taking major steps forward, and few of whom, actually Benoit would be the only exception, would have, despite success elsewhere, been pushed in WWF or WCW due to lack of size. But Heyman's manipulations when it came to others were so good that by the end of 1995, both WWF and WCW were making major pitches toward his top act at the time, the tag team of Public Enemy, with neither group even recognizing P's actual lack of wrestling ability. ECW became almost an unofficial stepping stone to WWF and WCW for a lot of mid-level and international talent due to Heyman's ability to create characters and get a variety of types of wrestlers over, and the fact that so many people pay attention to ECW as the only real alternative in U.S. wrestling. Heyman, who eventually bought out the financial control of the company from Gordon, was able to get the group into a loose, almost unspoken working arrangement, first with WCW briefly, to obtain the services of Brian Pillman, and later a more public relationship currently with WWF, not to mention presenting 2 pay-per-view shows, all the while building the company around a storyline of being the independent, politically incorrect alternative to the big two. Exactly what the true story as to what Gordon really did and why isn't clear. In particular, Since at least some of the wrestlers Gordon allegedly spoke with allegedly had contracts with ECW, which one would think he would have known about. Who is said to be under contract with ECW and what those contracts actually stipulate is always questionable given claims about contracts with Raven, Stevie Richards and Saturn and WCW's ability to use all of them with no problem with the exception of the questionable use of Raven on the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view show because of a pay-per-view non-compete clause in a singular event, as opposed to a long-term contract Raven definitely had signed. Heyman apparently informed the WWF of all this weeks ago with the idea that WCW was involved in contract tampering with his company, which he had already claimed in regard to a lawsuit that he publicized on his own television show and hotline, but hasn't been filed at press time. Heyman claimed as well he told Taylor specifically he was tampering with ECW contracted personnel. That charge would be similar to a charge in WWF's lawsuit against WCW that they tampered with Nash and Hall while the two were still under WWF contracts and prior to them giving notice and jumping. In other words, that the two companies could work together in their respective legal claims to try and establish a pattern of behavior by their mutual business enemy. About the only thing to say about the WWF Ground Zero pay-per-view show on September 7th from Louisville, Kentucky, is that it was the first 3-hour in-your-house show presented at a $29.95 price tag. How that increase in price on a monthly basis affects the buy rates and overall pay-per-view revenue, which should increase significantly, is a lot more of a story than what turned out to be a wilder product and maybe an overall slightly above average show. The event sold out weeks in advance in the 6,000-seat Louisville Gardens, with 4,963 paying $82,228 and another $44,184 in merchandise. Probably the most memorable thing on the show was the angle where Steve Austin gave Jim Ross a stone-cold stunner. The first ever match of Undertaker vs. Shawn Michaels was notable for yet another world-class performance by Michaels. The fact Bret Hart beat Patriot in the WWF title match should have surprised nobody, but the near burial of Patriot, just a few weeks after arriving in the WWF, was the Headbangers winning the WWF Tag Team title in the Fatal 4-Way, which given the work rate was an appropriate name for the match, was a surprise, although the finish, where Austin giving Owen Hart a stone-cold stunner causing his duo with Davey Boy Smith to lose, shouldn't have been. The next attempt to push the Minis from Mexico highlighted their ability to do spots, but the attempt to turn them into 1960s Mighty Midgets doing the Sky-Low Low and Fuzzy Cupid spots were woefully outdated. The Triangle match was a strong worst match of the year candidate. There really isn't much to say about Brian Christopher vs. Scott Putski since due to Putski's injury early on, the match was stopped well before it had gotten going. Brian Pillman vs. Goldust was the beginning of what appears to be a very long soap opera-like angle, and to their credit, their match was a lot better than their first meeting at SummerSlam. 1. Brian Pillman pinned Goldust, Dustin Runnels, in 11:05. They introduced a new aspect of the storyline that Pillman and Terry, Marlena, had a relationship before she married Dustin, and that Pillman was the one who dumped Terry and she went to Dustin on the rebound. As far as factual truth goes, I believe there is something to some of that. Pillman didn't wear the dress to the ring, which was the original plan. Although Pillman is limited by his bad ankle, this was his best performance since his accident. He took a lot of hard bumps including stun gun on his face on the ring steps. He tried a bulldog but Goldust threw him off and he crotched himself. He took a suplex on the ramp. He was crotched on the post. There were chants of both Goldust sucks and Pillman sucks. Pillman even took a bump off the top rope outside the ring, crashing throat first on the guardrail. Marlena slapped Pillman. Pillman missed a drop kick off the top rope and Goldust went for the curd call, but in doing so, the ref was knocked out. Marlena tried to hit Pillman with her purse, which had a brick in it. Pillman got the purse from her and hit Goldust with it instead and scored the in. Lawler grabbed the purse and pulled the brick out. At the same time, Pillman dragged Marlena off with him and threw her into his car and drove off while Goldust tried to chase them down. For the rest of the show, Lawler kept making remarks like the two were together in a motel. The angle aspect was great and match was good. 2.5 stars. 2. Brian Christopher, Brian Lawler, beat Scott Putski, Scott Bednarski via count out in 4:40. Fans chanted Jerry's Kid at Christopher. Even though the show was in Louisville, USWA territory where Christopher has been a face for years, the crowd reaction to him was mixed and the crowd didn't react to him as everyone expected they would as the hometown hero. Fans really weren't into this match like you'd think. They were just getting started when Christopher hit a pescado but landed low and Putski's knee went out catching him. Putski couldn't get up and they showed a close-up of his knee out of position. Putski was carried out on a stretcher. The word we got is that Putski suffered a torn quadricep, front thigh, muscle and had surgery the next day and would be out of action 3 months. Lawler went out to do a monologue on him, but apparently seeing the severity of the injury, stopped. 1/2 of 1 star. 3. Savio Vega, Juan Rivera, won a triangle match over Farouk, Ron Simmons, and Crush, Brian Adams in 11:39. They mentioned that Simmons would be going next weekend to Florida State University's football game for their Hall of Fame ceremony. Crush, or at least Crush's bike, got the only pop coming out. Farouk whipped Crush with a belt. Crush got the belt and whipped him back. Crowd was dead. The match wound up with one pinning another and the third guy would make the save since the first guy scoring the pin wins in these ridiculous rules. Lots of near falls but none were exciting. Match went too long and got really bad. In particular, Vega and Farouk blew a neckbreaker spot worse than you'd expect from two guys in their first pro match. The match disintegrated from that point into one of the worst matches you'll ever see. Crush finally hit Farouk with a heart punch, but before he could score the pin, Vega hit him with a spinning heel kick and pinned Crush. The finish would be best described as a mercy killing. -1 1/2 star. 4. Max Mini pinned El Torito, Mario Jimenez, in 9:20. This was the repacked Mexican Minis, with Max being the former Mascarita Sagrada Jr. and Baby Rabbit, and Torito being the former Espectrito and Mini Vader. Did they do a trademark check on El Torito, as it sounds almost exactly like a Mexican restaurant chain in the Southwest and West Coast? But luckily none of the announcers seemed to know that, and we didn't get any bad El Torito jokes from Lawler. The new names were because Antonio Pena threatened WWF with legal action, saying he owned the rights and created the names. Max will be pushed as the world's smallest professional athlete. The first 2 minutes were incredible, with Torito serving as a base for Mini to do all those quick spinning head scissors type moves and a flip tope which popped the crowd. It was also almost the only lucha that they did. Then they started doing 60s US Mighty Midget spots. Max biting Torito's butt got no crowd reaction, although when he bit the ref's bump and the ref chased him around the ring and he ran into Lawler's arms and put on the crown, it did get a crowd response. Torito started destroying Max, although that got no reaction. It went too long and was starting to die, since Max is actually very inexperienced and has probably only worked a handful of singles matches in his career, as these guys would do much better in tags. As they went to the finish, it picked up with the amazing acrobatic spots, including Max doing an Osai moonsault, called a plancha by Ross, and got the win with a sunset flip. It appeared from the reaction here that people who had never seen the two before were really wowed by the high spots, but those who had seen them in their element were disappointed at the overall match. 2 3/4 stars. Next came the ceremony where Dude Love and Steve Austin were to give up the tag title belts to Sergeant Slaughter. Dude gave his up. Austin came out to the expected huge pop and began running down Jim Ross, Vince McMahon and Sergeant Slaughter, and threw his belt down. He called Ross fat ass, and when Ross praised him, Austin gave Ross the stunner. The crowd chanted "Slaughter sucks" as they were helping Ross out. It appeared Ross was supposed to do a stretcher job, but they had used the stretcher for Putski and forgot to bring it back. Austin's mic work and performance in this angle, along with the Michaels performance in the main event, pretty well stole the show. This left McMahon, who appeared to be really tired on the air, and Lawler, to announce the rest of the show alone. 5. The Headbangers, Charles Warrington and Glenn Ruth, won the WWF tag titles in a four corners elimination match over Owen Hart and Davey Boy Smith, Legion of Doom, Mike Hegstrand and Joe Laurinaitis, and Godwins, Mark Canterbury and Dennis Knight. Awful. Bulldog has dropped even more weight, probably to make it easier on his bad knee. Owen was a one-man match, but since he was hardly ever in, that says all you need to know about the match. LOD was DQ'd first for wearing out Godwins with the bucket that they had brought in at 9:54. Thrasher did a running dive off Masha's back and nailed Phineas on the floor. Finally, Thrasher pinned Phineas with a sunset flip in 12:12. Hart and Bulldog versus Bangers wasn't good either. At one point they missed up either a clothesline or a crucifix spot with Bulldog and Thrasher. The match was into the negatives, except the last minute was good, ending with Hart putting Mosh in the Scorpion, but Austin ran in and gave Hart the stunner, and Mosh scored the pin to win the titles. Dud. 6. Bret Hart beat the Patriot Del Wilkes in 1920 to retain the WWF title. From a psychology standpoint, this was a very good match, but it was lackluster in other ways. Patriot wasn't over at all to the crowd until the end, despite the big build-up and being in a more southern-oriented city. Patriot worked on Bret's left arm. Bret worked on Patriot's left knee, including doing the figure 4 around the post. Smith came out and the crowd chanted for Austin. Finally, Smith tripped Patriot and Brett got a near fall with a rolling reverse. At another point, Brett and Smith collided and Patriot got a near fall with a schoolboy. Vader then showed up and attacked both Smith and Hart and they did a four-way. Vader and Smith brawled to the back, leaving it as a singles match again. Patriot got near falls after a shoulder block off the top, Patriot missile, and an atomic drop into a back suplex combo. Hart came back with a stun gun, bulldog and forearm off the top rope. After a ref bump, considering there were 4 more to come in the main event, this was slightly more than overkill dusty booking. Patriot got the Uncle Slam but no ref to count the fall. After a few more near falls, Patriot got the sharpshooter on. Brett reversed the hold into his own sharpshooter and got the submission. It was a great story match of an All Japan main event variety, but unlike an All Japan title match, it only had so-so execution. After the match, Brett gave Patriot a piledriver, broke his American flag and choked him with it, and ended up decking Pat Patterson as well. It was hard to figure out after having Patriot do a submission job why he was buried so badly in the post-match as well. 3¼ stars. 7. Undertaker Mark Calloway went to a no contest with Shawn Michaels, Michael Higginbottom, in 1603. Actually, the whole deal went closer to 23 minutes between a nearly 5-minute pre-match brawl and a few-minute post-match brawl. Excellent work, but plagued by so many ref bumps and contrived booking gimmicks that the crowd was numb well before the finish. Undertaker punched out the first ref before the bell even rang and beat Michaels all over the arena, with Michaels taking awesome bumps. At one point, Undertaker threw the ref over the top rope onto Michaels on the floor, although Michaels was one step too far back and didn't catch the ref well. Michaels took bumps in the ramp and into the bushes where the house set was set up. He rolled all the way down the ramp, was choked with a cable cord and thrown into the rail. Finally, about 5 minutes after they started, the bell rang to start the match when a second ref came out. It continued as a Michaels bumpathon. The second ref ended up being hit with a chair inadvertently. Michaels used 2 elbows off the top, but by the time a ref recovered, Undertaker kicked out. Rick Rude came out and threw Michaels nuts and he KO'd Undertaker, but the ref was still down. The ref recovered, but Undertaker kicked out, and Michaels stomped on and decked ref Earl Hebner. Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Chyna came out. They whipped Takers into the ring steps, which he took on his knees. At this point, a third ref came out and Michaels attacked him. Michaels bled hard way under the eye. Undertaker got the knucks from Michaels' trunks and hit Michaels and Helmsley with them, but when the ref finally recovered, Michaels kicked out. Undertaker then choke-slammed the Hebner. Yet another ref ran out, this time being Tim White, and he ruled it a no contest as the crowd booed the finish. Undertaker continued to brawl after the match with Michaels and Helmsley. Helmsley decked Tim White. Michaels tried to hit Undertaker with a chair as he was tied in the ropes, but Undertaker kicked the chair into Michaels' face. All the agents ran in with Michaels decking Gerald Briscoe and kicking Tony Garea. At this point, a ton of wrestlers ran in, and as they were dragging Michaels out of the ring, Undertaker did a running dive over the top rope to the floor, caught by about a dozen guys, but the dive would have made Psychosis or Great Sasuke proud. 3¾ stars. The aftermath of the NWO skit where they did a parody of the Arn Anderson retirement interview is another interesting piece of curiosity. The angle and much of what was said and done was known ahead of time to all the particular parties being mocked. However, from all accounts after the show in Pensacola, the heat was really bad between the two sides, supposedly because Kevin Nash in particular had gone too far or hit too close to home on certain subjects, in particular drinking, when mocking Anderson. There was also supposedly a lot of heat from the Horseman's side, as originally the parody was supposed to end with the Horseman hitting the ring and cleaning house while Arn Anderson, who never appeared before the cameras on a show designed as a tribute to him, stood on the ramp and watched with a smile on his face. However, just before the show went on the air, Terry Taylor told Ric Flair that was being nixed and instead Flair was supposed to do an interview as his comeback later in the show. As is well known, Flair, after the segment aired, refused to do the interview, and there was a lot of concern because of the heat with Flair and Anderson after he called home, based on the parody hitting home. How much of that was a work and how much was a New Japan-style shoot angle becomes a question, particularly in the current wrestling environment. If Flair and Anderson's reactions were an angle, done in conjunction with Kevin Sullivan and kept between those three with virtually nobody else knowing about it, everyone else in the company was being worked. We know for certain that the NWO and none of the other wrestlers were in on the angle. If it was a work, it was more a work on the wrestlers involved in the skit than it was on anyone else, But Sullivan likes doing those things, such as attempting to work the boys in his angle with Pillman and in his wife having an affair with Chris Benoit, and the two even having a fake bar fight in front of nobody but the boys after a Nitro in New Orleans. In fact, the heat from the other side, because of what they believed was heat for the Horseman side, reached what could be termed scary proportions later that night, to the point there were people thinking another Arn Anderson Sid Vicious situation, not as severe but that basic situation, could take place. Even as late as after the September 8th Nitro in Milwaukee, there continued to be what several close to the situation called legitimate heat between the two sides, although the situation was no longer considered dangerous. We've learned in so many cases that Sullivan and Eric Bischoff, stemming from last year's Pillman angle, get off on working the boys on their angles, even if it never pays off in traditional wrestling storyline fashion, and in the long run only leads to even more mistrust than the natural wrestling day-to-day business produces naturally among the employees. In addition, sources close to the situation claim that Flair and Anderson's acting was too good and emotions too real for it not to have been legit. Flair's comeback angle on the September 8th Nitro was his best interview in a long time, and nothing short of yet another in a 3-week string of classic memorable stuff stemming from this angle. This brings two other questions come to mind. If Flair's actions in not doing the interview on September 1st were legit, how come there was no disciplinary action taken against him for refusing to perform on a live television show? Oh yeah, because there is no discipline when it comes to behavior of any top star in wrestling. Not that if Flair was truly as upset as he appeared to be with the manner of mocking the injury-forced retirement of his best friend, that his actions weren't somewhat understandable? And how come the main event was changed for the September 14th Winston-Salem pay-per-view to Horseman vs. NWO to fit perfectly into this storyline? This change was supposedly made midweek at a WCW booking meeting, stemming from the reaction so strong both positively and negatively to the parody that the main event change was an obvious business decision. The fact it wasn't something planned out in advance could be confirmed by the fact that Benoit was booked into Japan starting September 11th for the New Japan Tour, and neither he nor New Japan were informed his debut would have to be delayed a week until the end of this past week because WCW was going to need him to stay for the pay-per-view show. However, if there was really internal fear about problems occurring, changing the main event wouldn't take place. In a situation that was legit, like the Bret Hart-Shawn Michaels backstage problem at Raw, because of those problems the WWF was forced to keep the two apart for several months rather than book them against each other as had been planned and had already been built up in the storyline. Speaking of Benoit, in the angle the NWO was supposed to bring a mannequin out to play the part of Benoit. Several reasons were given that day as excuses as to why that was nixed, although it's pretty clear from Nitro on September 8th that the real reason was because Hogan and Bischoff were going to use a mannequin in a skit the next week. The situation with NHB and shoot wrestling matches, which seemed in decline just a few months ago, has sprung up with several important shows and matches on the horizon. On October 11th, there will be interesting shows of totally different varieties in both the United States and Japan. The Pride 1 Tokyo Dome show with the long-talked-about Rickson Gracie vs. Nobuhiko Takada match had the rest of the card announced this past week. The semifinal on the 6-match NHB show will be Tank Abbott, 6-5, in his Japan debut versus Kimo, 7-2. Abbott appearing on this show is interesting because this match will be just 6 days before Abbott is scheduled in the UFC tournament. Also, Hiroki Kurosawa, who placed 6th last year in the Kyokushin Karate World Championships, versus Igor Mendo, a 6'8", 285-pound Russian amateur wrestler, pro wrestler and former sumo giant Koji Kiao. 6'7", 370, puts his 0-2 NHB record up against Nathan James, a 6'10", 350-pound Australian who competes in World's Strongest Man type contests. In his first NHB match, John Dixon, who lost over this past weekend to Dan Severn on an IFC show in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and has done NHB tournaments in Oklahoma and Russia in the past, versus Kazunari Murakami, who lost to Maurice Smith in the main event on the final EFC pay-per-view show, and Henzo Gracie versus an overmatched Akira Shoji, a 23-year-old with a 1-1-1 record in Japanese NHB matches. That same night on American pay-per-view will be the debut of John Peretti's IWF promotion, basically promoting a new sport which will be submission wrestling with no striking allowed. As mentioned here many times, it is questionable how marketable such a project would be, but to Peretti's credit, he has put together easily the best athletic lineup of any pay-per-view of the type to date. The theme of the show will be amateur wrestling stars versus submission fighters, with matches consisting of 5 3-minute-long rounds. There will be a scoring system that awards points for the winner of each round similar to boxing's 10-point must-scoring system, with high throws, sweeps, takedowns, and reversals being emphasized in the scoring as far as 2-point differential rounds. It appears based on the rules and the combatants then these will be matches against the clock for the submission guys as much as against world-class opponents. The amateur wrestlers should dominate and be able to outpoint the submission fighters under the rules and point system, provided that they don't get caught before the time expires and have to tap out. Although intriguing to the hardcore UFC or wrestling fan because of the caliber of fighters, this concept of the wrestlers trying to avoid the submission before time expires as the key to most of the matches may get redundant without the aura and excitement of potential brutal striking. The matches announced were 139-pound limit Dennis Hall, 1996 Olympic silver medalist in Greco-Roman, versus João Roque, pronounced actually as John Hawk, 1997 weight class world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 159-pound limit Townsend Saunders, 1996 Olympic silver medalist in freestyle versus André Pederneiras, world-renowned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor and practitioner, 179 Kenny Monday, 1988 Olympic freestyle gold medalist and considered one of the best wrestlers of the past 15 years, who debuted impressively at the last EFC pay-per-view versus Matt Hume, AMC Pancratian fighter 2-0 in EFC, 199 Carlos Newton, Canadian Jiu-Jitsu champion, versus Chris Barnes, two-time All-American wrestler at Oklahoma State, Frank Shamrock, former King of Pancrase champion, versus Dan Henderson, 1996 Olympian in Greco-Roman, 2-0 in NHB in Brazil, and Igor Zinoviev, 4-0-1 in EFC, including its champion in this weight class with a Samba and Jiu-Jitsu background, versus Mike Van Arsdale, 1988 NCAA champion from the University of Iowa and currently still among the elite of active amateurs in his weight. And in the heavyweight division, the main event pits Tom Erickson, fourth at the recent World Freestyle Championships and 5-0-1 in NHB, versus Tsuyoshi Kosaka from Rings, who is an excellent pro-style shoot worker who has done several shoot matches in rings and has acquitted himself well in them. This also has political implications in Japan since Erickson is scheduled to debut for Pancrase in December and is likely to wind up as one of its top stars. Pancrase vs. Rings is turning into its own non-angle feud. Perhaps the biggest coup of all is that Dan Gable, considered in many circles as the greatest wrestler ever produced in the United States, has agreed to work as color commentator on the show along with Peretti and Dave Bontempo. 6 days later on pay-per-view will be the UFC, with the double headliner of Maurice Smith defending his title against Dan Severn and Vitor Belfort versus Randy Couture. There will also be a 4-man heavyweight tournament. While not finalized, the working plan as a press time was for a first round to consist of Abbott versus Carlau Barreto, 7-0 NHB record from Brazil and considered along with Marco Ruiz to be the top heavyweight NHB fighter in that country, and Mark Kerr 5-0 against either Gary Goodridge, 6-5, or David Beneteau, 2-4. Also not announced, but rumor now has it that this show will emanate from Biloxi, Mississippi. In somewhat related news, Rings held a press conference this past week to announce a Frank Shamrock vs. Kosaka match on September 26th in Sapporo in what is believed will be a shoot match. It's part of perhaps Rings' most intriguing show of the year, headlined by what should be a worked match with its two best workers, Volkan vs. Kiyoshi Tamura. At the press conference, President Hirameda said that Rings would be opening up new branches and teams in both the United States and Australia, and that the Shamrock's Lion's Den would be the dojo for Rings USA. According to Shamrock, he is signed to do only one match for Rings on September 26th, and as part of his agreeing to do the show, got Rings to book another Lion's Den fighter, Pete Williams, who fought in the Pancrase Neo Blood tournament in 1996 along with winning 2 tournaments in Hawaii, on the show. Williams faces massive Holland fighter Joop Kasteel. Shamrock said he's not interested after all the monthly traveling he did for Pancrase in fighting in Japan as a full-time regular, but did want to open Rings up as another group to send Lion's Den fighters. The press in Japan took the signing of Shamrock, who was a star in Pancrase before leaving the company in the wake of the contract dispute the company had with Ken Shamrock, as another blow in a feud between the two organizations which has gotten hotter over the last few weeks. At the August 13th show in Kagoshima, Maeda in an interview brought up Pancrase and claimed his company was going to destroy Pancrase. It is believed this comment came as a result of Maeda learning that a major television executive from the Fuji network had said that Rings was largely worked, which is true, and he blamed Pancrase officials, which have negotiated with that network on and off for several months, for telling that to the network official. The next step was the press conference announcing Shamrock, a former Pancrase champion, to face Kosaka, one of his company's biggest stars, and that fans will view as something of an inter-promotional match, which means it'll create a lot of interest in the card. That means both Shamrock and Kosaka will have 2 major matches against serious competitors under entirely different rules in about a 2-week period. It was no coincidence that Maeda held the press conference one day before Pancrase had one of its biggest shows of the year scheduled at Tokyo Bay NK Hall on September 6. Pancrase's retaliation at the show ended up falling flat. With a crowd estimated at 5,000 to 5,500 in the 7,000-seat building, although it was announced publicly as a sellout crowd, Yuki Kondo retained his KOP championship in 27-22 of a 30-minute match with an ankle lock on Jason DeLucia. The non-sellout can be attributed to the lack of name value to casual fans of the main event participants. Supposedly Pancrase officials had made plans either way, not really caring who won the match and knowing it could go either way. The idea was that after Yoshiki Takahashi beat Jason Godse, that Takahashi would challenge Maeda to a match that wouldn't take place, of course. The problem is that real shooting can be unpredictable, and that Godse ended up beating Takahashi with a choke in overtime, so when Takahashi issued his post-match challenge, it didn't come off as well. The Pancrase organization did survive something of a scare from a political standpoint in the semifinal, where top draw Masakatsu Funaki beat recent UFC lightweight tournament winner Guy Mesger with an armbar in 3:58. After the Maeda press conference, Pancrase was under the impression with the announcement about Lion's Den being a Rings dojo, that Mesger would be jumping shortly to Rings as his contract with Pancrase is expiring, even though Mesger went on the Pancrase television show in July saying the rumors of him leaving were false. The feeling is that it would have been a loss of face for the company for Mesger to beat the top star and then join its rival promotion, and that Mesger is a good enough fighter than he conceivably could have won the match. The two other key matches on the Pancrase show saw Boss Rutan capture the number 7 ranking from Asami Shibuya with a headlock choke submission in 3:15, and Kyuma Kunyoku won a decision by a 1-0 score over John LeBay in what was reported to us as an even match. LeBay, rated in the top 10 in the world at under 200s and NHB making his debut with this group, lost his point from a series of yellow card cautions likely for not understanding the Pancrase rules. Right now, Rings is a far stronger promotion financially than Pancrase due to its backing from the Wow Wow channel, equivalent to HBO in the United States, even though Pancrase has a much higher percentage of shooting matches. In the past, Maeda has never knocked Pancrase and simply said that they were great fighters but that they were all 90-kilogram, 198-pound guys and that his Rings was a heavyweight promotion. However, Pancrase just recently signed up a major sponsorship deal with Nissan Motors, and Maeda recognized if Nissan helps Pancrase get major television exposure, the entire landscape changes based on visibility. In yet another related NHB issue, it appears the proposed match between Maurice Smith and Royce Gracie for November 9th at the K1 show at the Tokyo Dome isn't going to happen as we speculated about last week. Semaphore Entertainment Group officially came out and said that they wouldn't allow Smith to participate in the match if he retains his title against Severn. Semaphore Entertainment Group's contract with Smith allows Smith to fight kickboxing matches and matches in Japan with Rings, but no NHB matches anywhere in the world without their authorization. For political reasons of not wanting their world champion to be at risk against a fighter with the skills of Gracie, particularly since Gracie's asking price, supposedly $350,000 for one match, of UFC is way out of their ballpark. In the fight game, an asking price out of the ballpark of reality is the polite way of turning down a match. The Gracies weren't interested in the match if Smith were to lose to Severn, since at that point Royce would be in a situation where he has something to lose but nothing major to gain, so those mutually exclusive situations has doomed the match. In addition, the Shudo promotion in Japan has booked Tokyo Bay NK Hall for a Valley Tudo show on November 29th, which would have a theme of featuring the regular fighters from Shudo against fighters brought in from foreign countries. With a return to a largely head-to-head situation on September 8th, the Raw vs. Nitro feud set a new record for margin of victory with Nitro almost doubling the audience of Raw. Nitro earned a 4.27 rating, 4.28 first hour, 4.26 seconds hour, and 6.73 share, its second best rating ever in a head-to-head situation. Raw did a 2.15, 2.10 first hour, 2.20 seconds hour rating and 3.39 share. The Nitro replay did a 1.90, 2.80 first hour, 1.78 seconds hour, 1.27 overrun 30 minutes, and 3.67 share. A large margin of victory was expected given the momentum Nitro has coming off its two largest audiences in history, combined with the historical fact that it takes Raw 2 or 3 weeks every year to regain its audience after the US Open preemptions. Nevertheless, this larger margin was staggering. In the actual head-to-head period, Nitro beat Raw 4.26 to 2.12, so it actually slightly more than doubled the audience for the first time ever over that long a period of time head-to-head. Even more staggering is that the Nitro replay's first 38 minutes that went head-to-head with Raw's final 38 minutes saw Nitro do a 2.70 to Raw's 2.27. The first hour of Nitro saw the audience grow every quarter, starting at 3.7 and ending at 4.7, which was the actual audience peak for Armstrong vs. Jericho. A combination of the start of both Raw and the NFL brought the Hogan and Bischoff interview with the Sting mannequin dropping to a 4.4. Raw did a 2.0 at the time with the Slaughter/Austin angle, followed by a major drop to a 3.8 for Steiner's vs. Faces of Fear and Hall vs. Colo. Raw did a 2.4 for Brett vs. Vader, which was its peak rating. The trailer/Hall angle and Malenko vs. Psychosis picked things up to a 4.0. Raw did a 2.0 for Bangers vs. Godwins, followed with the Jarrett and Deborah interview and most importantly the return of Piper hitting a 4.7. Raw did a 2.0 for the first Pillman video. Flair and Hennig vs. Bagwell and Conan dropped to 4.4. Raw did a 2.2 for the Mexican Minis, while Page vs. Luger ended with a major drop to 3.8. Raw did a 2.0 for Owen vs. Goldust and the second Pillman video. It was the third straight week Luger couldn't hold his lead-in rating even though he was in the main event, which shows just how much losing the title that quickly hurt him, and this angle hurt Page as well. Fans don't want to see their heroes be whiny crybabies or pathetic screw-ups, and that's what both came off as the past few weeks. Even with Nitro going off the air, it handed Raw very little lead-in as the Patriot-Helmsley-Vega triangle did consecutive 2.3 segments against a strong WCW replay rating. Mexico. The main event for the EMLL 64th anniversary show at Arena Mexico was officially announced as El Hijo del Santo vs. Negro Casas in a mask versus hair match. With Santo booked elsewhere on the past 2 Fridays, they only have one show on September 12th at Arena Mexico to shoot the final hot angle for the match. It's strange since virtually the entire year they've been building the feud as Santo vs. Felino, but I guess in the end they decided against taking Felino's mask. This would be the second meeting under mask versus hair stipulations, the first being at the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles in 1987, and you know who won that. The same person who is going to win this. Also on the show, Lila Gonzalez will have her retirement ceremony, and there will be a tag match with Marco Yoshida and Shaparita Asari versus Kuga and Linus Asuka, which gives credence to the idea that Yoshida and Asari may be leaving AJW perhaps for JD. The basic reason for the split between Victor Quiñones and Paco Alonso, and Quiñones sending his talent on August 29th to Promo Azteca when they were originally booked for EMLL at Arena Mexico, stemmed from international politics. It's a long, involved story that started with a meeting Quiñones set up with Alonso and Vince McMahon at Connecticut in April, where Alonso agreed to supply talent for the WWF's proposed light heavyweight division. The deal fell through in June when Eric Bischoff and Alonso spoke, and Alonso decided to work with WCW. A few weeks later, when the Bischoff deal wasn't concluded, Alonso gave Quiñones the green light to book EMLL talent himself for WWF. One of, not the prime reason WWF still hasn't done its light heavyweight title tournament is because of problems in getting the expected talent from both Japan and Mexico they were expecting to be the backbone of the division. Quiñones claimed he was going to send Dr. Wagner Jr. and Shocker to WWF for the TV tapings on September 8th and September 9th, and Alonso agreed to it. But after the meeting with Alonso, Conan and Bischoff in California, Alonso pulled Wagner and Shocker from going to WWF and said he was going to send them on September 8th to Nitro instead. In retaliation, Quiñones pulled his 4 wrestlers, the Headhunters, Steele and Kevin Quinn, from the EMLL show on August 29th, telling Alonso about it at 2 p.m. the day of the show, and had them do a run-in on the Promo Azteca television tapings the night instead. His feeling is that Alonso was using both he and the WWF to get Bischoff back interested in a working arrangement. He also agreed to a business truce with Conan and the Azteca promotion and sent Pantera of Azteca along with Hysteria, who was scheduled to wrestle under his former name of Super Crazy, to the WWF tapings this week along with 4 minis. Wagner and Shocker were supposed to debut on the September 8th Nitro, and we're not sure what happened except that they weren't there. Steele was scheduled for a WCW tryout on September 9th in Madison, Wisconsin under his non-masked ring name Sean Morley, but that wasn't booked through Quiñones. Morley had a WWF tryout recently but wasn't offered a deal. Super Muñeco jumped from AAA to Promo Azteca and debuts on the September 12th. All we've heard about the August 29th show in Tijuana is that it drew 3,400 and wasn't a good show. El Hijo del Santo and Rey Mysterio beat Negro Casas and Felino via DQ in what was said to have been the best match. The finale was La Parca and Super Parca and Pandiero I over El Hijo del Solitario and Misterioso and Phobia. Arturo Mendoza, Villano 3's son will debut shortly as El Hijo de Villano 3. He was in an auto accident last month. Box E Lucha ripped Halloween/Cyclope. Cyclope lost a mask match last month, but the magazine revealed he was Halloween and is still wrestling under that name. Grand Marcus Jr. still hasn't been paid for losing his mask. All Japan. The climax of the tour was September 6th at Budokan Hall before an announced sellout of 16,300 fans. We didn't get a live report on the show, so can't verify if that attendance figure is correct, but I'd guess the show really didn't sell out. Mitsuharu Misawa beat Jun Akiyama to retain the Triple Crown in 24:57 using a Tiger Driver in what we were told was a great match, which aired the next night on television. The other key matches saw Steve Williams and Gary Albright and Yoshihiro Takayama beat Tamon Honda and Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao in 17:20 when Williams pinned Honda after a backdrop driver, and in a match to help build heat for the FMW Kawasaki Stadium show. The FMW duo of Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki beat Kenta Kobashi and Kentaro Shiga in 20:32 when Hayabusa pinned Shiga with the Firebird Splash, which I believe is the same as the Scorpio Splash. Masahito Kakihara of Kingdom was at the card and challenged Kawada to a match at a Kingdom House show, so that looks to be the start of a program between the two. Kakihara is much smaller than Kawada, but is a good shoot-style worker as compared with Takayama, who had been doing the program with Kawada and has size, but is a terrible worker. The next tour will be September 27th to October 21st with the big shows on September 27th and September 28th at Korakuen Hall, October 1st in Osaka, October 4th in Nagoya, October 10th in Hiroshima, October 11th in Fukuoka, and finishing up on October 21st at Budokan Hall, which is the traditional anniversary show. On the tour will be Stan Hansen, Williams, Johnny Ace, Albright, Giant Kimala 2, Lacrosse, Johnny Smith, Bobby Duncombe Jr., Rex King, and Sean Morley. Kamikaze and Hiroyoshi Katsubo of the Wrestle Dream Factory promotion worked a prelim match on the September 4th show in Ashikaga, losing to Kobashi and Shiga. Both wrestlers are from that area, and Kamikaze went to the same high school as both Misawa and Kawada, although many years after they graduated. Since Misawa, Kawada, and Kamikaze were wrestling in the city they grew up in, the show drew an SRO of 2,200. Kamikaze was said to have shown some potential, but Katsubo wasn't as impressive. August 24th TV show did a 3.2 rating. New Japan. The new tour starts on September 12th. The biggest news actually involves an interpromotional angle with K1, which along with New Japan is the most popular combat promotion in the country. At the K1 show on September 7th at the Osaka Dome, which drew 38,200 fans and $4 million, Peter Aerts, who along with Andy Hug is considered the biggest star in the promotion, came to the ring along with his handlers, all wearing NWO t-shirts. The handlers wore the shirts during the entire match, which was by itself tremendous exposure for New Japan since the card aired on tape delay later that evening in prime time and drew a Seinfeld-like 16.0 rating, which meant that the live crowd, live gate and total television audience for the show were all record setters. Aerts actually didn't even know what the NWO was, but he and his crew were told by K1 promoter Kazuyoshi Ishii to wear the shirts to the ring. Aerts won his match in 1/13 of the third round with a high kick to the face knockout of James Waring, a former IBF World Cruiserweight Boxing Champion who competed in the World Combat Championship pay-per-view show and went 2-1, losing in the finals to Henzo Gracie. Jean Riviere of Canada, who competed on an EFC pay-per-view show, lost via decision in double overtime to Masaaki Sadake. Katsushi Nagashima of the New Japan front office appears to have made some kind of interpromotional deal, and on the November 9th K1 show at the Tokyo Dome they are at least in the talking stages of having either Great Muta or Masahiro Chono in Aerts, who is probably the favorite to win the entire tournament, corner, and getting Shinya Hashimoto in the corner of Aerts' opponent, will be Mike Bernardo. In addition, I believe on the television show Branko Sikatek, who was the first ever K1 Grand Prix champion in 1993 and is now 42, said that he was going to have mixed matches on New Japan major shows. It is believed he'll be matched against Hashimoto and or Naoya Ogawa at upcoming Dome dates. Sikatek then lost his match in just 38 seconds to Bernardo. Sikatek doing New Japan is probably only the start of bigger money interpromotional matches. On the surface, with both New Japan and K1 drawing big stadium houses on their own, the timing of them working together seems strange, as usually these relationships take place when one, or both, group is struggling for economic survival or needing the exposure from the big company to elevate their own product. But when technology in Japan starts catching up and pay-per-view becomes a real factor, interpromotional matches between the two groups could do mind-numbing business. The Osaka Dome was also the first event of its type broadcasted live worldwide on the internet. There were more complaints about it than anything, ranging from people having a hard time receiving the signal and a stuttering picture. Famous American kickboxer Rick the Jet Rufus made his debut losing at 105 of round 3 against Jerome LeBanner due to leg kicks and the ref stopping the match. On the K1 show, the winners all advanced to the Tokyo Dome tournament, which has Francisco Filio versus Sam Greco, LeBanner versus Ernesto Hoost, Bernardo versus Ertz, and Sadake versus Hug. The winners will advance with the bracketing in the order listed above. The quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals take place at the Dome, which will be the biggest K1 show in history. New Japan videos are back at most of the Japanese video stores in the United States after not being available for about 1 month. August 23rd TV show did a 2.6 rating. Other Japan notes. The problems with All Japan women are seemingly getting worse as Misai Genki, Yoshiko Tamura, and Tiny Mouse have all quit this week because of being so far behind in getting paid. In addition, rumors have it that Itsuko Mita, Mima Shimoda, Shaparita Asari, Saya Endo, Mariko Yoshida, and Yuka Shina are all on the verge of leaving. Based on how the promotion has been built, if Mita and Shimoda were to leave now after so many other big names have left in recent weeks, that would be a crippling blow. The only ones solid with the promotion appear to be Yumiko Hata, Manami Toyota, Kaoru Ito, Takako Inoue, Tomoko Watanabe, and Kumiko Makawa. Complete FMW show for September 28th at Kawasaki Stadium will be an as yet unannounced women's tag match as the opener, a Street Fight Royal Rumble, a World Brass Knucks tag title match with Mr. Ganasuke and Hisakatsu Oya defending against Gedo and Jado, a match for the vacant WWA and an independent women's title. Megumi Kudo held both belts when she retired on April 29th, with Shark Tsuchiya versus Asia Kong, Terry Funk versus Hiromichi Fuyuki in a match billed as being for the old NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. The Gladiator defends his World Brass Knucks and Independent Heavyweight title against Masato Tanaka. Ken Shamrock versus Vader in what is now being billed as a UFC rules match inside a cage. Hayabusa and Jinsei Shinzaki versus Kenta Kobashi and Manukia Mossman. And Atsushi Onita versus Wing Kanemaru in the electrified explosive barbed wire match. JWP's benefit card to the family of Plum Mariko Umeda, the woman wrestler who died on August 16th, will take place October 30th at the Tokyo Ota Ward Gym, which is near where she grew up. It's going to be an interpromotional show in which 8 different companies will all send one match, so none of the matches themselves will be interpromotional. The 8 companies involved in the benefit show are JWP, AJW, LLPWJD, FMW, IWA, Social Pro Wrestling Federation, Yoshiaki Yatsu's Indie Group, and Big Japan. Dan Severn arrived in Japan on September 7th to join the IWA tour and spent the day going from newspaper office to newspaper office in Japan doing interviews with 4 different title belts, pushing his NWA title defense on September 10th in Fukui against Great Kabuki. Former UFC fighters Patrick Smith and Moti Horenstein both debuted in pro wrestling on the September 3rd Kingdom show at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,300, doing jobs respectively for Yoji Anjo and Kazushi Sakuraba. Added to the October 10th Michinoku Pro Show at Sumo Hall is Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Shoichi Funaki vs. Super Delphin, first match back, and Masato Yakashiji and Naohiro Hoshikawa. The angle they are running with Delphin is that if he didn't show up at the August 31st show in Sendai and Sumo Hall, that his pay would be cut in half for the rest of the year. So he showed up on August 31st, but as a gimmick, refused to talk with company president Great Sasuke. In minor title news, Alexander Otska beat Victor Kruger from Austria to win the Battle Arts tournament on September 7th in Tokyo. JD created its first junior champion on September 7th at Tokyo Korakuen Hall with former judo champ Megumi Yabushita beating Sumiko Sakai in the finals. Shinobu Kandori has asked for a match against a male opponent on the Pride One Shoot show at the October 11th Tokyo Dome. Pablo Marquez is headed to Michinoku Pro Wrestling this month. Kyoko Inoue issued a challenge to amateur women's world champion Kyoko Hamaguchi for an amateur rules match. Inoue did work the IWA show on September 5th at Korakuen Hall in her first match since leaving AJW. The holdup at this point appears to be that Hamaguchi wrestles in the 165-pound weight division and that Inoue has eaten her way up to 202 pounds and they want her to get down to the weight limit before doing the match. On the IWA show at Korakuen Hall, they had a gimmick in the main event where heels Freddy Krueger and Leatherface, Doug Gilbert and Rick Patterson, faced Tarzan Goto and Great Kabuki. The stip was that if Krueger and Leather lost, their valet, Maya, would have to do a strip show in the ring. However, Maya blue-green mist in Kabuki's face and he was pinned. Most importantly, the gimmick didn't draw at all as there were only about 500 in the building for the show. The first singles match in many years between Genichiro Tenryu and Abdullah the Butcher took place on September 9th in Ishikawa with Tenryu winning. USWA. There continues to be all sorts of chaos behind the scenes. Although it has been reported that the USWA has been sold to a Texas group, we're again told by people in the company that the same three-person ownership group from Cleveland is still in control. The only person from Texas in a management position is James Beard, who along with Burt Prentice is in charge of booking and promoting spot shows, and his hiring came at the recommendation of Bruce Pritchard of the WWF. There is infighting among that ownership group because very little money is coming in after a lot of money was spent on cosmetic changes to give the promotion and the television show a more modern look, and General Manager Larry Burton was again talking about leaving this week. I believe they went 8 days without running any house shows, and with nobody under a guaranteed contract except the people sent here by the WWF, the wrestlers have to survive on their either $40 or $100, depending on the wrestler, per shot, which doesn't add up to much when you multiply $100 times 0 shows. In addition, the company has eliminated the babyfaces picking up extra money working the gimmick table, as it has wanted to take over concessions in a more professional manner, but as of yet that really hasn't started happening either. Tommy Rich and Rex King are gone. Rich left after doing 2 shows. Reports were that he looked really out of shape. He claimed he left over a $10 payoff discrepancy, but USWA claims he wasn't in shape and didn't protect Booker Dutch Mantle when they worked a match. There is some question as to the status of Doug Gilbert, who is currently on tour of Japan for IWA, since he and Rich have often stuck together, but he is expected back after the tour. Stephen Dunn won the USWA title from Doomsday at the September 6th TV tapings. After the match, Doomsday got mad and walked through a gimmicked wall. Hardbody was a newcomer, former WCW jobber Hardbody Harrison, with 2 women with him. He wrestled Brian Christopher on TV, ending when Billy Travis attacked Christopher with a chair and supposedly broke his hand, which of course wasn't ever mentioned on the WWF pay-per-view the next day. They continued the feud with Ref Downtown Bruno and TV announcer and ring announcer Tony Friedman, although they've never actually said what it is they are feuding over. To acknowledge Rex King leaving, Paul Diamond did an interview and said he didn't need any partners and wanted to go at it as a single, so naturally later in the show they announced he was going to form a tag team with Rod Price. They had a taped interview with Tommy Dreamer and they seemed to be building toward a 4-way match with Jerry Lawler, Dreamer, Bill Dundee, and Dutch Mantle. Here and there. A quick note regarding the death of Dale Lewis. Lewis was actually born on August 29, 1933, so he turned 64 2 days before he died. His actual cause of death was respiratory failure, but that stemmed from the leukemia that he had been battling for the past few years. The next USWF card will be on October 18th in Amarillo, billed as Battle of the Belts with 4 title matches: Evan Tanner versus Heath Herring to crown a USWF heavyweight champion, Paul Jones defending the light heavyweight title against Tony Castillo, Steve Nelson defending the middleweight title against Taichi Hayashi, and Michael Buell versus Diego Acosta to create the promotion's first lightweight champion. Dan Severn is also billed as appearing, although that's 1 day after the UFC pay-per-view show. Dano O'Shaker, who wrestled from the late 1940s through 1965 in virtually every territory in North America, passed away on August 31st at the age of 74. O'Shaker, whose real name was Jack Lloyd, was born in Scotland but raised in Hamilton, ONT. He served in the Canadian Navy during World War II, and after the war was stationed in South America, where he learned pro wrestling. He returned home and wrestled in his home area while holding a regular job for a few years before going full-time into wrestling in 1950, given the O'Shaker name as an Irish star. He appeared on the network TV wrestling prime-time broadcasts from Chicago that gave him the exposure to keep him steadily booked in the early 50s. He may be best noted for being the first tag team partner of then 17-year-old Ray Stevens, in Ohio. He also wrestled under the name Dano Geohagen as part of a brother tag team with Tim Geohagen in a feud with Ivan and Karl Kalmakoff. During his career he had world title matches against Buddy Rogers, Luthez, Stevens, Gene Kiniski and Killer Kowalski before retiring in 1965 and living in Northern California working as a tool and die maker. Ian Rodden's IWA, which had all the posters for them at the Louisville Gardens during the WWF pay-per-view show, ran 3 days before Ground Zero and drew 500 fans for the IWA versus NWA feud matches. Sherry Martel even juiced in a match against Debbie Combs, which saw Luna Vachon and Vampire Warrior attack Sherry to set up Luna and Vampire versus Sherry and Ian Rodden. Dennis Corraluzzo was at the show and claimed Ian tried to sexually molest his son and then made fun of Princess Diana's death, saying if she wasn't giving a BJ to an Arab in the back seat and instead wearing her seat belt that she might have lived. Bruno Sammartino will be doing a television commercial for Social Security. USA Pro Wrestling on November 1st at Lakewood Prep School in Howell, New Jersey has Tito Santana vs. Masked Superstar, Jimmy Snuka vs. Metal Maniac, Bam Bam Bigelow vs. Salvatore Sincere, and Tommy Cairo vs. Manny Fernandez, among others. Matt Osborne is continuing his Portland wrestling promotion, running weekly on Thursday nights. The crowd is staying steady at around 300 per week, using almost exclusively local wrestlers. On August 21st, he brought in Nor the Barbarian from Minnesota and had a match to determine his first Pacific Northwest Tag Champions, as Matt Bourne and Bruiser Bryan beat Nor and the Grappler. Greg Valentine, the Northwest champ, is scheduled to return this month. Observer correspondent and frequent contributor Tadashi Tanaka signed his second major book deal with the Yomiuri newspaper book division. The Yomiuri newspaper is the largest circulated daily newspaper in the world, 10 million daily circulation, but the newspaper itself never covers pro wrestling. This would be the first time the company has produced something in print form on pro wrestling. The book, tentatively scheduled for a publishing date in late November or December, is written as a comparative cultural study of the United States and Japan and will have chapters covering UFC, K1, rings, pancrase, Monday Night American TV War, ECW, and pro wrestling trade journals. He is looking for photographers to help with the book and can be reached at 212-741-1058. Oleg Toktarov and Tony Halme both appeared on a boxing show in Atlantic City, New Jersey on September 6th. Toktarov knocked out powerlifter Hank Hill in the second round, and Halme knocked out Paul Grink with one punch. Mr. Fuji has opened up a wrestling school in Lenore City, Tennessee, and is also planning on promoting small-time shows in the city. Some notes on the rap band Insane Clown Posse that was on the ECW pay-per-view. The rappers are from Detroit and met at a WWF show about 10 years ago. The Philadelphia Inquirer did a story on the band since they played a club date there over the weekend, with no mention that where the name of their one-hit song, which hit number 66 on the Billboard charts largely due to the pub from Disney-owned Hollywood Records banning it, the Great Malenko, came from. The members have also wrestled on Michigan area Insane Championship wrestling shows at Hector Hatchet and Sewer Dweller. Although it was originally thought Michael Modest of All Pro Wrestling would be out of action for a few weeks with an ankle injury, he returned on the September 5th Hayward, California, and dropped his APW title to Donovan Morgan in what was said to have been an even better match than the ones we've praised involving him over the past month. Robert Thompson, who was also injured shoulder on the August 29th show, is out of action and will be seeing a specialist on September 10th. This group is in the planning stages of opening up a wrestling school in Seattle and begin running shows in the state of Washington. Century Wrestling Alliance has a free show at 11 a.m. on September 20th in Wallingford, Connecticut, with Jimmy Snuka, King Kong Bundy, Roadblock, Devon Storm, Vic Steamboat, and Ace Darling. NHB. Dan Severn upped his record to 16-3-1 with an expected win over John Dixon on September 5th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on an IFC show that drew 2,500 fans. The match was stopped after what was called total destruction in 2:33. Reports were that it was a really good show. Severn was expected to cancel his October 12th Tokyo shoot match, so this would be his last shoot match before the Smith match at UFC, but left immediately after this match to join the ongoing IWA tour in Japan. They held an 8-man tournament which included former Pancrase fighters Wes Gassaway and Vernon White and former UFC fighters Felix Lee Mitchell and Anthony Macias. The tournament wound up dominated by Vladimir Matyusenko, a world-class freestyle wrestler from the former Soviet Union who has beaten Kevin Jackson in the past, which tells you what caliber of wrestler he is. Matyusenko made White tap out in the first round in 5:44, beat Robert Lalonde in the second round, before putting away Macias in 2:59 in the championship match. They also held what was probably the first women's tournament ever in the United States, although it was a 4-woman tournament won by VG Zalico without a championship match, as her first round winning opponent couldn't continue. There will be an interesting show on September 26th in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, called Pentagon Combat, with Lions Den fighter Jerry Bolander, 6-1, facing Murillo Bustamante, 4-0-1. In the main event, Renzo Gracie, 4-0, against Eugenio Tato. Amari Bitetti, who lost to Don Fry in one of the all-time classic fights in UFC history, captured the Absolute Division World Championships in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over the weekend, beating another former UFC competitor, Fabio Jurgel, in the finals. Churchill, Royler Gracie and Mario Sperry all won in their weight division and ended up as the top 4 overall, with Sperry and Gracie tied for third. ECW Weekend House shows drew 600 for a TV taping on September 5th in Waltham, Massachusetts, and 900 for a house show on September 6th in Revere, Massachusetts. Jerry Lynn debuted, losing to Chris Condito the first night and to PJ Walker, Aldo Montoya, the second night. The latter match was said to have been the best wrestling match of the weekend in ECW. Lynn was said to have looked good, but Walker is expected to get the biggest push of the newcomers. New Jack had his first match in Massachusetts since the Eric Kulas incident in Waltham, but didn't work the Revere show. New Jack and John Kronus beat Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley in a non-title street fight in Waltham. The top angle continues to involve Sabu and Rob Van Dam versus Sandman and Tommy Dreamer. The only match announced for September 20th at the ECW Arena is Sabu versus Sandman. In Waltham, the two wrestled to a no contest when Dreamer, Van Dam and Taz were all involved, and it wound up with Taz challenging Dreamer to a TV title match. That match also ended in a no contest when Sabu and Van Dam attacked both of them, which wound up with Bill Alfonso being buried under Dreamer's ECW banner. In Revere, Taz beat Condito in a TV title match. Dudley's beat Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney in a bloodbath brawl all over the building with all kinds of weapons and triple juice. Shane Douglas kept the ECW title, beating John Kronus. There was a surprising lack of heat for Kronus challenging for the title in his hometown. Reports were that the Revere crowd overall was more subdued than usual. Sabu beat Dreamer in the main event when Van Dam interfered. Sandman and Taz made the save and again buried Alfonso under the ECW banner. There were complaints at the show because Sabu vs. Dreamer only went 4:15 and the other main event, Sandman vs. Van Dam, didn't take place at all, as they did an angle during intermission where Sandman was signing autographs and Van Dam hit him with a beer bottle and he juiced. ECW has a show on October 30th at Twin Rinks in Stamford, Connecticut. Chuck Singer, who held the lightweight title in Puerto Rico, is scheduled to get a look later this month. WCW. WCW is coming off its most successful house show week in history. September 4th in Springfield, Illinois drew $4,314 and $68,347. September 5th in Peoria, Illinois drew $4,051 and $83,919. September 6th in Indianapolis at Market Square Arena drew $9,821 and $181,394, plus $75,000 in merchandise. September 7th in Chicago at United Center drew $9,905 and $184,099, $88,000 merchandise. Nitro on September 8th in Milwaukee drew a sellout $8,596, $7,810 paid, and $190,017, $53,400 merchandise. In the Saturday night tapings on September 9th in Madison, Wisconsin drew $3,056 and $52,463. Indianapolis would have to be among the highest grosses ever in the city. The record would be the WrestleMania in 1992, and Milwaukee may have been the second highest gross ever in the city. Hogan vs. Andre in 1988 did an outdoor stadium show that did more than $300,000. The total revenue from gate and merchandise combined on the week will exceed $1,050,000, making it the first $1 million house show week in company history. WWF in its heyday regularly did $1 million weeks and even weekends, not even including merchandise, but it was also running more than 20 shows per week during those glory days. Nitro House show opened with a dark match with Perry Saturn debuting, beating Billy Kidman by submission with the War Special. Saturn was still favoring his bad knee, but considering the extent of the injury, it's nothing short of incredible that he's actually working matches. Our reports were lukewarm on how he looked, that fans in the first few rows were reacting big to him and nobody else knew who he was, and there were some badly missed moves. Saturn was telling people he left because he didn't want to team with Kronus anymore and because he realized there were only two places to work to make real money in the business. Saturn's contract was a 3-year deal at $100,000 per year, but apparently he emphasized that even if Kronus were to come to WCW that he didn't want to team with him, and there is a clause that if his knee goes out again in the first 90 days that WCW can cancel the contract. TV opened with them beginning to air a tape of the Horseman spoof, but then the Horseman came out and got it shut off and went to the ring for an interview. Hennig, who will apparently turn on the Horseman and join the NWO for the finish of the War Games, McMichael and Benoit had nothing to say and the segment was a real disappointment until Flair gave a classic interview. They said they wouldn't leave until the NWO came out, but then security came out and they left. That part was weird. Later in the show, Nash and Syxx said they had better things to do but had Konnan and Bagwell accept the challenge. Still feel the show begged for Arn Anderson to do an interview announcing he'd be in the Horseman corner on the pay-per-view. Rey Mysterio Jr. returned and pinned Eddie Guerrero with the springboard Hurricane Rana in 8:55. Mysterio Jr. was tentative in spots and unsure of his knee holding up, and because of the nervousness missed some spots. Where Mysterio Jr. is the best in the world at is he is the single best at recovering and reacting in midair and turning a missed spot into a new move. Good match. The result and other results this week seem to lead one to believe Guerrero will beat Jericho to win the Cruiser title at the pay-per-view, particularly with Jericho going to Japan after the pay-per-view because you don't want your world champion losing in another promotion, although today that is less of a concern than ever before. Diamond Dallas Page did an interview challenging Lex Luger to a match. Luger accepted. Crowd was surprisingly subdued for both, and really didn't care to see them wrestle. Hugh Morris pinned Disco Inferno with a moonsault at 3:14. Alex Wright threw Disco his TV title and Morris moonsaulted onto Disco with the belt on his stomach. Disco sold it as if he was hurt worse and argued with Wright after. Jericho kept the Cruiser title beating Brad Armstrong via DQ in 2:36 when Guerrero interfered. Match wasn't clicking before the run-in. Hogan challenged Sting again but Sting wasn't there. They are doing an angle where there is a mole in WCW letting NWO know when Sting isn't there so Hogan can make the challenges. A mannequin dressed as Sting fell from the ceiling and crashed on the floor, and Hogan acted concerned as if it was a mistake before revealing it was a mannequin and slapping and leg dropping the mannequin while Bischoff with a ref shirt counted the pin. Steiner's no contest Meng and Barbarian in 5:31 when Harlem Heat, Jacqueline, Mortis and Wrath all ran in. Pretty bad. Scott Hall beat Super Colo in 2:31 with the outsider's edge. Just a squash. After the match, Ray Traylor attacked Hall and gave he and Vincent the Bubba Slam. Hogan then distracted Traylor and Hall jumped him and gave him an edge, and they spray-painted Ray Who on his back. Dean Malenko beat Psychosis with the Cloverleaf in 7:10. Work was very good but outside incidents distracted the crowd from the match. First, a fan hit the ring and was snatched by UFC Bantamweight champion Mark Curtis, who slapped a front facelock on him and had him tapping when security nabbed him. Backstage the fan explained that it was his wife's birthday and he just wanted to get on national television. Later there were a couple of other fights in the crowd so fans were looking away from the ring. Roddy Piper came out for an interview announced as new commissioner due to J.J. Dillon being injured by Hogan. He made his typical dated references to John Belushi in Animal House. Wasn't that like 20 years ago? The Brady Bunch, well, they did have 2 recent movies but that was 25 years ago. Mentioned he used to be WWF commissioner. Fans booed the name WWF loudly which caused Piper to laugh because he wasn't expecting that reaction. Aside from that, his interview was much better than most have been of late. He announced he was putting himself against Hogan in a cage match at Halloween Havoc, that he would sign Hogan to wrestle Sting for the title before the year 1997. Gene Okerlund had to correct him and say before the end of 1997, and that he was putting the Horsemen into War Games and taking Luger and Page out. Flair and Hennig beat Konnan and Bagwell in 9:25 when Hennig pinned Konnan with the Fisherman Suplex. Pretty good in spots, not so good in others so average all around. Finally Luger went to a no contest with Page in a bad anticlimactic 4:41 ending when the NWO attacked both guys. Giant came in for the save, and the show ended with Luger and Page shaking hands. There were loud boring chants before the run-in. Luger is actually getting worse as even the few things he does don't look good. The unopposed Nitro on September 1st drew a 4.73 rating, 4.48 first hour, 4.83 seconds hour, 4.90 third hour, and 7.64 share, making it the second most watched Nitro in history behind the previous week. The movie Overboard, which finished with a 4.7, gave them a tremendous lead-in, which is why the first hour was so strong. Rating only grew slightly and actually ended up in the final segment almost exactly where it started. Segments that saw growth and losses of significance were Silver King vs. Mortis +.3, Parka vs. Dragon +.3, Richards vs. Damien. The Four Horsemen parody skit +.3, which drew the peak audience at a 5.1 and 3,687,000 homes, and Luger and Page vs. Hall and Savage. 5. A drop that size for the main event that had been built up throughout the show says a lot, combined with the surprisingly weak rapidly declining replay rating, 1.61 rating overall with a 2.53 first hour, 1.33 seconds hour and 1.10 third hour and 4.41 overall share. seems to indicate that 3 hours was too long that week. Ratings for weekend of August 30th saw main event at 1.1, Saturday night at 2.4 and Pro at 1.2. For weekend of September 6th saw main event at 1.0 and Saturday night at 2.1 with Pro preempted. Clash replay on August 28th drew a 1.3 rating and 2.7 share, which is well below what most Clash replays do. It wasn't pushed hard on TV, but the replays never are. Reports from the house shows were pretty consistent in that the undercards were really good and the top matches blew. At Indy, the first 5 matches, Benoit over Conan, Jericho over Dragon, Guerrero over Malenko, Steiners over Six, and Hall and Flair over Jarrett, were all said to be good. Savage vs. Page death match had a terrible finish. Page got the pin with a diamond cutter, but since it was a death match, Savage had a 10 count to get to his feet. As the ref was making the count, he gave Page a low blow and Page went down. Savage got up and the ref continued Savage's count on Page, who didn't get up, and ruled Savage the winner. Giant and Nash did a double count out, since the run-in DQ finish they had done earlier in the week couldn't be done with Hulk vs. Lex following with the same finish, headlined by a chair shot with a padded chair. Giant gave Nash that was said to be the weakest chair shot in history, to the point the crowd loudly booed it. Giant had said in an internet interview that he was going to debut his moonsault in his singles matches against Nash, but has yet to do it because Nash didn't want to be the guinea pig for a guy that size trying out a move like that. Hogan vs. Luger is what you'd expect, with Hall and Six interfering for the DQ. They were actually in the aisle waiting for the two to work to the finish when Luger put Hogan in the rack. Luger put Hall and Six in the rack after the bout. Crowd was about 50-50 when it came to face/heel split, although Dragon got about 90% face reaction against Jericho. Jarrett had super heat every show working against Flair and McMichael. Bobby Heenan was the ring announcer for the main event and talked about his career getting started in Indianapolis in 1965. Chicago card was supposed to be the same as Indy, except Bagwell was brought in for Flair since McMichael and Jarrett had a singles match, since McMichael is a local football star. However, it totally changed since Conan, Nash, Six, and maybe another NWO guy arrived late. Malenko, Guerrero, Dean winning, and Jericho Dragon were good. Flair vs. Bagwell was average at best. Savage vs. Page had a death match that only went 4 minutes and was terrible. Page came out with Mancow, a local shock jock who pushes the live wrestling heavily for both WWF and WCW. Mancow came to the ring with a Page t-shirt, then took it off before the match started, revealing an NWO t-shirt. Didn't we just see that with those insert outdated reference here galloping gourmet guys on the Clash? Mancow ended up hitting Page with a foreign object and he lost the match, but after the match Page gave Mancow and ref Nick Patrick the diamond cutter. Conan beat Benoit. Then it was scheduled as Steiners vs. Six and Hall, but Steiners issued a tag title challenge earlier in the show and it was accepted. It wound up with Bagwell and Six interfering and Giant coming out and it becoming a 3-on-4, ending in 8:30 of a bad match with Giant pinning Hall. It was then explained the title didn't change hands because Giant scored the pin. McMichael beat Jarrett in a match with the expected great heat. Fans chanted defense at McMichael. Finale was the same Luger-Hogan run-in DQ finish. An advertised singles match with Giant vs. Nash never took place. Most fans seemed to leave happy, but many were upset at the screw jobs and no Nash-Giant single. The huge house should be the ultimate evidence as far as revealing too much and its repercussions on the business. Many people in WCW freaked out at a Chicago Sun-Times article after the Nitro in the same building about backstage encounters, talking about Giant and Rodman and Hogan talking over their spots and the like. As we mentioned in the 90s, there is no such thing as exposing the business because it is the entertainment business, not the pretend it's real business. Of course, the people who freaked out will ignore this and all evidence until the end of time and continue to freak out. By the way, this is nothing new. Back in 1971 in Los Angeles during the famous Fred Blassie-John Tolos angle where Tolos blinded Blassie supposedly for life by throwing the dreaded Moncel powder and Blassie was gone for months, building to a big return outdoors. The Los Angeles Times did a column about wrestling during the build-up and revealed that all the time Blassie was supposedly blinded and his career was over, he was actually wrestling in Japan. The result? Blassie vs. Tolos drew 25,000 fans and what at the time was the second largest live gate in history, and even 26 years later it's still the biggest wrestling crowd ever in California. That feud continued to be the hottest feud in the area on and off for years until, and even after, Blassie retired as an active wrestler based on that one angle. So even in the days that stuff was supposed to hurt the business and everyone was in their perpetually paranoid state about exposing the business, it really didn't matter. Barry Darsow was in the office looking about getting in. WCW Saturday night tapings from Madison, Wisconsin on September 9th saw for the show on September 13th. Highlights saw Eddie Guerrero over Chavo Jr., McMichael over Greg Valentine via DQ in a U.S. title match said to be awful. What a shock. When NWO interfered, Dragon beat Kalo and Hall beat Luger via DQ and Hall had him in the edge and Page ran in, followed by Savage, and Luger wound up cleaning house. For September 20th, Bobby Walker got a squash managed by Teddy Long. Long's reappearance can be tied to the return of Sullivan to the booking committee. Trailer beat Vincent. Dragon had right in the Dragon Sleeper in a TV title match when time ran out. Before the show started, Hennig did a strong heel interview running down Wisconsin, so unless this was a red herring, one would think they were doing this so the live crowd would boo the hell out of him, which means he's doing a turn on the Horseman at some point before September 20th. The plan is definitely for the pay-per-view, but WCW changes its mind to fool people so they may hold it off for Nitro the next night, or forget about it again totally. Steiners beat Bagwell and Norton when Trailer attacked Bagwell. Malenko beat Yuji Nagata. Final saw Benoit beat Jarrett via DQ when Eddie G interfered, and McMichael made the save. Crowd was really hot early as even the bad matches had great heat. Only Guerrero, Page, Dragon and Mysterio Jr. had their working shoes on. Flair vs. Jarrett was announced locally as the main event. Flair was there but didn't wrestle, coming out in clothes for one run-in. After the show ended, there were loud "We want Flair" chants. Fans didn't know the show was over and despite a respectable card, left really upset because Flair never wrestled. Black Magic starts in October while Bischoff agreed to bring in Mr. Aguila and Black Warrior, so they won't be going to WWF. Nitros in December are December 1st in Knoxville, December 8th in Buffalo, December 15th in Charlotte, December 22nd in Macon and December 29th in Baltimore. Starrcade with Hogan vs. Sting is December 28, 1997 at the MCI Arena in Washington, D.C. Rick Martel signed a 2-year contract and should be started imminently. At press time, Fall Brawl in Winston-Salem, North Carolina had sold 8,119 tickets for $163,925, with 2,300 seats left. Nitro in Charlotte on September 15th had sold 4,923 tickets for $76,480 with 3,000 seats left. October 18th in Houston at Astro Arena has Luger vs. Hall, Flair and Benoit vs. Nash and Bagwell, Conan vs. Mysterio Jr., Malenko vs. Jarrett, Public Enemy vs. Harlem Heat, Jericho vs. Guerrero, and Wright vs. Garza. With the success of the wrestling product, Bischoff is now looking to expand and come up with new similar programming ideas for TBS and TNT. Suggestions batted around, and believe me, these are in such preliminary stages of suggestions, so don't blow this out of proportion, are things like a revival of roller derby and working with K1 on an American expansion. WWF. The next pay-per-view will be called Bad Blood on October 5th in St. Louis with Michaels vs. Undertaker in a Hell in a Cell cage match with a top on it and padlocked, Bret and Bulldog vs. Vader and Patriot. Why Patriot was buried so badly on Sunday and Monday is really curious when he's being put so high on the card on the next pay-per-view. In a flag match, Dude Love vs. Pillman Falls Count Anywhere, LOD and Shamrock vs. Farouk and Kama and Maivia and Headbangers vs. Godwins, presumably for the tag straps if they don't change before that time. There will also be the finals of the IC tournament, which looks to be Owen vs. Ahmed Johnson, and they've confirmed the appearances of former NWA champions Dory and Terry Funk, Luthez, Gene Kiniski, Jack Briscoe and Harley Race, along with longtime NWA president and St. Louis promoter Sam Mushnick to be honored. A correction from last week, the similar themed TV tapings in Oklahoma City and Tulsa that we listed for October 6th and October 7th are actually on October 20th and October 21st respectively. October 6th and October 7th tapings are Kansas City and Topeka. Raw on September 8th from Cincinnati drew a sellout of 6,627, paying $96,126 and $45,210 in merchandise. TV opened with Slaughter doing a heelish commissioner interview and getting booed quite heavily for it, almost doing a Backlund-like gimmick. He announced an IC title tournament and that Austin was suspended until he gets clearance and would have to be at the October 5th pay-per-view to forfeit the belt. Austin, who was the star of the show, came out and gave Slaughter the stunner and teased going after McMahon until he was pulled away. Austin has told other wrestlers that he's feeling fine and isn't in that much fine, and is simply waiting for his neck to heal before he returns, but he obviously looked fit and can do angles and will be at a lot of the house shows doing almost advertised run-ins. Bret went to a no contest with Vader in 10:46 of a no-rules match which ended with Bulldog interfering, Patriot making the save, then Owen unevening things before Austin came out to clean house. Good. Godwin's beat headbangers in a non-title match in 308 when a third Godwin, Uncle Cletus, Tony TL Dirty White Boy Hopper Anthony, hit Mosh with a horseshoe and Phineas pinned him. McMahon said that's just what the WWF needed, was a third Godwin. Far too true. Dude Love was scheduled against Pillman in the IC tourney but Pillman wasn't there and instead sent in a video for Goldust to watch acting as if he spent the night with Marlena in a motel. They announced they'd reschedule the match for a later date. Max Mini beat Pirate Tita Morgan in 242 with La Magistral, or in WWF vernacular, what a pinning combination. They never did get Morgan's name right, McMahon kept calling him something like Parita Morgan. Not as good as the night before. Morgan is a little slow and heavy but makes a great base for Max to do all those spinning moves off him. Undertaker did an interview and Michaels appeared on the video wall to hype their rematch. In an IC tourney match, Owen beat Goldust via DQ in 212 after a barrage of low blows. Part 2 of the Pillman 30 files aired in the motel room. They were supposed to have a triangle match with Helmsley, Patriot, and Bulldog, but Michaels and Helmsley attacked Bulldog and destroyed his bad knee. Nobody saved Bulldog since this was an angle where he's a babyface for the England pay-per-view show. Vega replaced them and they went 17:03 in an absolutely awful triangle match with loud boring chants. After a ref bump, Vega and Patriot collided and Helmsley pinned Vega. Michaels did color and was a riot screwing with McMahon on live television. Highlights from Shotgun tape that night were Brian Christopher over Pantera and LOD beating Farouk and Kama via DQ while Undertaker beat Brett via DQ in the dark match main event. For next week, Raw and Shotgun were taped September 9th in Muncie, Indiana before about 5,000 fans. It was overall a hot crowd. The freedom of expression era is now over as WWF was confiscating signs left and right, particularly those pro-WCW. They were also very nicely asking fans who wore WCW merchandise to instead wear the free Austin 316 shirts they were giving out. The freedom of expression policy on signs should have been cool, but it had really gotten out of hand as it was distracting from the product. In too many matches, it was more entertaining reading either the creative or more often the absolutely lame signs than watching the matches. In the IC tourney, Shamrock beat Farouk and afterwards the rest of the Nation of Domination attacked Shamrock and LOD made the save. Taka Michinoku beat Pantera. LOD beat Recon and Sniper via DQ when Interrogator interfered. The Nation of Domination joined in beating on LOD until Shamrock made the save. Interrogator was said to have looked terrible. A Minis tag that was pretty good saw Max Mini and the repackaged Mascarada Sagrada, not sure what name he used, beating Morgan and Torito. In the IC tourney, Pillman beat Dude Love via DQ when Goldust attacked Pillman. Marlena was in Pillman's corner with a new hairstyle, a nose ring and dressed all in black, acting as if she was miserable. She was cheering on Goldust when he attacked Pillman. Austin did an interview with Lawler. During the interview, Owen Hart came out with a lawyer and got a restraining order against Austin. The segment wound up with Austin giving Lawler the stunner to a big pop. Patriot then beat Owen when Austin distracted Owen. However, since he violated the restraining order, the police came out and arrested him and hauled him off. I swear that sounds familiar. I just can't remember if I saw it on Nitro or heard about it regarding the personal life of a WWF superstar. Probably both. Michaels did an interview and Undertaker showed up on screen to build the pay-per-view match. Final Raw match saw bangers no contest Bulldog and Brett. First Bulldog pinned one of them, but since he pinned the illegal man, the bout was restarted. They had a plant fan at ringside waving a US flag and Bulldog got mad and attacked the fan and grabbed his flag. Brett and Bulldog then attacked bangers with a US and Canadian flag until Vader and Patriot made the save. For Shotgun on September 20th, Godwins beat Skull and 8-Ball when Uncle Cletus interfered with the Lucky Horseshoe. Rockabilly and Jesse Jean beat Jose Estrada Jr. and Jesus Castillo of Los Boricuas. Owen beat Flash Funk. Vader beat Sultan and Pantera beat Super Loco. Hysteria in Mexico. In the dark matches, LOD and Goldust beat Pillman and Owen and Bulldog when Goldust pinned Pillman in all of 30 seconds, and Shamrock beat Brett via DQ when Owen and Bulldog did the run-in as Shamrock had Brett in a submission. Weekend ratings for August 30th saw Livewire at 1.3 and Superstars at 1.9. For September 6th, Livewire did 1.3 and Superstars 1.8. The Friday night main event show on September 5th did a 1.6 rating. WWF is attempting to sign Michinoku to a 5-year contract and having him move to New York and learn English. Besides the 3 minis that were on the weekend shows, also signed by WWF was the original Mascarada Sagrada, the original Octagon Cheeto and Espectrito 2 or Mini Mankind. In an effort to build up stronger relations with the media, particularly in Japan, Titan has opened up ringside at all its events to magazine photographers after a ban dating back to 1984 when McMahon's goal was to take wrestling completely over, including controlling every aspect of the business. WWF is looking at getting a strong relationship with the Japanese media since it wants to run a Tokyo Dome show in the next year or two. Phil LaFon is ready to return, but they are holding him off until Doug Furnas can return. Furnas is back in training and waiting for medical clearance. Among the topics of seemingly consensus discontent among the wrestlers seem to be 1. A negative reaction to Sid being fired after being in a serious auto accident. WWF contractually in most contracts can let wrestlers go, as can WCW, with 90 days notice even on long-term deals if the wrestler is unable to perform. WWF has never exercised that option in the past, and wrestlers are thinking if they start with Sid, they'll make a habit of using it to get rid of highly paid guys when money is short. Of course, the Sid situation is totally different from a Titan standpoint, because he's always injured and there is little doubt the auto accident injuries were legit, but people question some of the seriousness of other injuries. They didn't fire him but wanted to change his deal where he'd get paid per date worked rather than guaranteed weekly paycheck. Since he just signed his old deal, he didn't want to renegotiate, and then they used their clause to drop him. There is also a dispute over when his 90 days runs out, as Titan is trying to make it 3 months from the auto accident, but Sid claims it should be 3 months from the night in San Antonio where he showed up the last time. 2. The continuing push of Helmsley, which everyone believes is due to his friendship with Michaels, since with all his push, he's still not over even when put together with China, who should make it easy for anyone to get over, and he's in line for an even bigger push. 3. Drug testing. Right now Titan has indicated it will test individuals, but it's not random tests as much as testing based on rumors and/or supposed behavior. Only one wrestler has been tested thus far. The fear is if there's a problem that the testing would become regular and widespread, and the wrestlers who partake in pot would have to give it up again. It has been confirmed and reported elsewhere that Hawk was the wrestler who passed out on an airplane several weeks ago, although he wound up being okay. It was the scare combined with the remembrance of the drug repercussions from the early 90s that, along with a few other incidents and no-shows, caused testing to be considered again. Michaels and Brackus were sent to England and Germany for a promotional tour. Due to the Princess Diana death, they canceled the England portion since it would have gotten no coverage at all. Ross and McMahon met last week with people interested in promoting tours in India and South Africa. Matt Ghaffari, the Olympic silver medalist, was given a look-see over the past week. He hasn't signed, but we're told it's a good bet that he will. Kane's debut, originally scheduled for the September 7th pay-per-view show, has been moved back to October 5th. There is also talk of programming Interrogator with Undertaker. The first Kane vs. Undertaker match won't be for a long time, as they are going to slowly build the feud where Undertaker won't wrestle him until forced into it, basically. Even though the US Open only did a 1.3 rating in the Raw time slot the previous 2 Mondays, that isn't as bad as it looks in comparison to Raw and Nitro ratings. The bottom line isn't ratings, it's the money those ratings bring in from advertisers. Tennis events are believed, and rightly so, to appeal to a higher spending demographic, so you can sell the commercials for a premium event like the US Open for more money than wrestling, even though wrestling delivers a bigger audience. That's why USA preempts the higher rated Raw with tennis every year at this time. It wouldn't surprise me that US Open spots sell for more money than Nitro spots, so in a sense, USA would be winning, though the numbers act as if they're getting killed. There has been a lot of talk of late of WWF taking over the Memphis territory if this ownership group pulls out. WWF wants to use the territory and control the booking of the territory as a way for its younger wrestlers under contract to gain experience. The ECW relationship is different. The belief is that ECW fans are both too impatient and unforgiving for inexperienced wrestlers to work there and not be psychologically driven right out of the business. Plus, the style that they'd learn to get over in ECW wouldn't be applicable to the style they'd have to work in WWF. However, WWF does want to send contracted talent that they haven't used correctly and have talent and experience, such as Al Snow and PJ Walker, to ECW to get repackaged. Paul Heyman inquired about using Furnas and LaFon when they're ready under similar circumstances. Only house show this week was September 6th in Nashville, which drew 3,864, paying $73,365. Lots of comments that Jim Ross should have sold the stunner more, such as either not appearing on Raw, though I'd be against that one, or appearing wearing a neck brace. Expect the Bangers tag title reign to be short, with either Michaels and Helmsley, Godwins, or LOD taking them. Rude's deal with WWF is that he can deliver punishment but can't take any, largely due to his injuries and his settlement with WCW, claiming his career in the ring was over from back and neck injuries. Expect the Pillman-Marlena angle to go similar to the old Dusty Rhodes baby doll deal. Marlena will act as if she hates it, but after the 30 days, it's planned she'll turn on Goldust again, and it'll come out that the acceptance of the challenge and brick in the purse ending up costing Goldust the match were all part of her plan. Marc Mero had been talked with, and it's been teased on TV of a split with he and Sable, but I think that one should be cooled down because it would be too similar, and also because Mero seems to legitimately have more of a problem doing the split with his wife on television than the Runnels family since Dustin grew up around the wrestling industry. October 11th in Anaheim, California has Brett vs. Shamrock for the title, Helmsley and Michaels vs. LOD, Love vs. Owen Falls Count Anywhere, Bulldog vs. Patriot for European belt, Vader vs. Ahmed, Bangers vs. Godwins, DOA vs. Nation of Domination 8-Man and Flash Funk vs. Mero. October 12th in San Jose has Brett vs. Helmsley vs. Shamrock with Michaels as ref for the title, LOD vs. Godwins in a country whipping match, Love vs. Owen Falls Count Anywhere, Bulldog vs. Patriot for European belt, Vader vs. Johnson, Crush and Chains vs. Farouk and Maivia. Funk vs. Mero and Bangers vs. Kama and D. Lo Brown. Austin will appear at both shows to do run-ins. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. September 15, 1997. This is the end of this program. Please be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.